Hello, students. Mrs. Miller here. I'm coming to you with Chapter 3 of our book, Gifted Hands. So today I will be reading Chapter 3, and I will be sharing my thoughts with you occasionally as I'm reading. Chapter 3, 8 years old. Rats! I yelled. Hey, Kurt, looky there, I saw rats. I pointed in horror to a large weeded area behind our tenement building. And they're bigger than cats. Not quite that big, Curtis countered, trying to sound more mature, but they sure are mean looking. Nothing in Detroit had prepared us for life in a Boston tenement. Armies of roaches streaked across the room, impossible to get rid of no matter what Mother did. More frightening to me were the hordes of rats, even though they never got close. Mostly, they lived outside in the weeds or piles of debris, but occasionally they scurried into the basement of our building, especially during the cold weather. I'm not going down there by myself, I said adamantly more than once. I was scared to go down into the basement alone, and I wouldn't budge unless Curtis or Uncle William went with me. Okay, Benny is 8 years old, I believe, in this chapter, and I'm a grown woman. And if I know that there's mice or something somewhere, I won't go. I don't like mice. So I couldn't even imagine if it were rats. Ooh. Sometimes snakes came out of the weeds to slither down the sidewalks. Once a big snake crawled into our basement and someone killed it. For days afterward, all us kids talked about the snakes. You know, a snake got into one of those buildings behind us last year and killed 4 children in their sleep, one of my classmates said. They gobble you up, insisted another. No, they don't, the first one said and laughed. They kind of sting you and then you die. Then he told another story about somebody being killed by a snake. The stories weren't true, of course, but hearing them often enough kept them in my mind, making me cautious, fearful, and always on the lookout for snakes. A lot of winos and drunks flopped around the area, and we became so used to seeing broken glass, trashed lots, dilapidated buildings, and squad cars racing up the street that we soon adjusted to our change of lifestyle. I'm having a text to self connection right now. In my city here in Gary, I noticed that sometimes people drive by and they just throw their garbage out. And there's just if I walk down into the alley, 'cause sometimes I walk over to the gas station to get a snack or something, there's just all this garbage. And I've been living here for 19 years. Dr. Carson said they became accustomed to it. As long as I've been here, I'm still not accustomed to it, and it makes me, I just can't stand it. I hate seeing garbage just thrown. And I wonder why neighborhoods that are like poorer communities, poorer neighborhoods sometimes have this issue with the garbage. I don't understand. Within weeks, the setting seemed perfectly normal and reasonable. No one ever said, this isn't the way normal people live. Again, I think it was the sense of family unity strengthened by the Averys that kept me from being too concerned about the quality of our life in Boston. Of course, Mother worked constantly. She seldom had much free time, but she showered that time on Curtis and me, which made up for the hours she was away. I noticed how the word constantly, like Dr. Carson when he was writing, he just had that one word and a period. Friends, that's what I talk about when I'm saying the fluency of your sentences. Some sentences are long, some are medium, some are short. He purposely did that word constantly, just that was all that was, to draw our attention to it so that we can better understand Mom's character traits. She is a very hard worker, and my evidence to support that is she works a lot. She works constantly. Mother started working in homes of wealthy people, caring for their children or doing domestic work. You look tired, I said one evening when she walked into our narrow apartment. It was already dark, and she'd put in a long day working 2 jobs, neither of them well paying. She leaned back in the overstuffed chair. Guess I am, she said as she kicked off her shoes. Her smile caressed me. Ugh, to caress means to hug. So he doesn't literally mean that he was being hugged by her smile. It was just, when your mom smiles at you and you just see all the love in her eyes and in her face. That's what he meant by that phrase. I lost my place. I'm sorry, you all. What did you learn in school today? She asked. No matter how tired she was, if we were still up when she got home, Mother didn't fail to ask about school. As much as anything, her concern for our education began to impress on me that she considered school important. I was still 8 years old when we moved to Boston, a sometimes serious minded child who occasionally pondered all the changes that had come into my life. Text to self connection. This time it's with Naomi. Naomi is not a serious minded child. She plays constantly. So that's just a comparison. That's one way that she's different than Dr. Carson. One day I said to myself, being 8 is fantastic because when you're 8, you don't have any responsibilities. Everybody takes care of you and you can just play and have fun. But I also said, it's not always going to be this way, so I'm going to enjoy life now. With the exception of the divorce, the best part of my childhood happened when I was 8 years old. First, I had the most spectacular Christmas of my life. Curtis and I had a wonderful time Christmas shopping. Then our aunt and uncle swamped us with toys. Mother, too, trying to make up for the loss of our father, bought us more than she ever had before. One of my favorite gifts was a scale model 1959 Buick with friction wheels, but the chemistry set topped even the toy Buick. Never, before or since, did I have a toy that held my interest like the chemistry set. I spent hours in the bedroom playing with the set, studying the directions and working one experiment after another. I turned litmus paper blue and red. I mixed chemicals into strange concoctions and watched in fascination when they fizzled, foamed, or turned different colors. When something I'd created filled the whole apartment with the smell of rotten eggs or worse, I'd laugh until my sides ached. Second, I had my first religious experience when I was 8 years old. We were Seventh-day Adventists, and one Saturday morning, Pastor Ford at the Detroit Burns Avenue Church illustrated his sermon with a story. A natural storyteller, Pastor Ford told of a missionary doctor husband and wife who were being chased by robbers in a far-off country. They dodged around trees and rocks, always managing to keep just ahead of the bandits. At last, gasping with exhaustion, the couple stopped at a short precipice. They were trapped. Suddenly, right at the edge of the cliff, they saw a small break in the rock, a split just big enough for them to crawl into and hide. Seconds later, when the men reached the edge of the escarpment, they couldn't find the doctor and his wife. To their unbelieving eyes, the couple had just vanished. After screaming and cursing them, the bandits left. As I listened, the picture became so vivid that I felt as if I were being chased. The pastor wasn't overly dramatic, but I got caught up in an emotional experience, living their plight as if the wicked men were trying to capture me. I visualized myself being pursued. My breath became shallow with the panic and fear and desperation of that couple. At last, when the bandits left, I sighed with relief at being safe. Pastor Ford looked out over the congregation. The couple were sheltered and protected, he told us. They were hidden in the cleft of the rock, and God protected them from harm. The sermon over, we began to sing the appeal song. That morning, the pastor had selected He hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock. He built his appeal around the missionary story and explained our need to flee to the cleft of the rock to safety found only in Jesus Christ. If we place our faith in the Lord, he said as his gaze swept across the faces in the congregation, we'll always be safe, safe in Jesus Christ. As I listened, my imagination pictured how wonderfully God had taken care of those people who wanted to serve him. Through my imagination and emotions, I lived that story with the couple, and I thought, that's exactly what I should do, get sheltered in the cleft of the rock. Although I was only 8, my decision seemed perfectly natural. Other kids my age were getting baptized and joining the church, so when the message and music touched me emotionally, I responded. Following the custom of our denomination, when Pastor Ford asked if anyone wanted to turn to Jesus Christ, Curtis and I both went up to the front of the church. A few weeks later, we were both baptized. I was basically a good kid and hadn't done anything particularly wrong, yet, for the first time in my life, I knew I needed God's help. During the next 4 years, I tried to follow the teachings I received at church. That morning set another milestone for me. I decided I wanted to be a doctor, a missionary doctor. Friends, I'm going to pause there because this reminds me of what we saw earlier with Chadwick Boseman and how he was talking about finding your purpose. And when you find your purpose, doors open up for you. And it seems like at the age of 8 years old, Dr. Carson knew what his purpose was. He knew what he wanted. He wanted to be a doctor. That was a text to text connection. I have a text to self connection. My younger brother right now is in med school. And from the time he was young, he knew he wanted to be a doctor. So he goes to IUPUI down in Indianapolis, and he's been working towards this goal. I mean, he is brilliantly smart. And so he too found his purpose at that very young age. My brother did too. So that's my text to self connection. Back to the book. The worship services and our Bible lessons frequently focused on stories about missionary doctors. Each story of medical missionaries traveling through primitive villages in Africa or India intrigued me. Reports came to us of the physical suffering the doctors relieved and how they helped people to lead happier, healthier lives. That's what I want to do, I said to my mother as we walked home. I want to be a doctor. Can I be a doctor, Mother? Now, based on Sonia Carson's character traits, what we already know about her, I predict that she's going to tell her son that he can do anything he wants to do, and she's going to greatly encourage him because that's her character. Let's see if I'm right. Benny, she said, listen to me. We stopped walking, and Mother stared into my eyes. Then, laying her hands on my thin shoulders, she said, if you ask the Lord for something and believe He will do it, then it will happen. I believe I can be a doctor. Then, Benny, you will be a doctor, she said matter-of-factly, and started walking on again. After Mother's words of assurance, I never doubted that I wanted to do what I wanted to do with my life. I shared with you all earlier that one of the things I make sure that I do is I surround myself with people who say encouraging things to me, who tell me I can be successful with my business, I can raise a child, I can do school, I can teach. I'm not going to be around someone who puts me down. And I'm happy to see that Dr. Carson's mom was the same way. So that gave him that encouragement that he needed. Like most kids, I didn't have any idea of what a person had to do to become a doctor, but I assumed that if I did well in school, I could do it. By the time I turned 13, I wasn't so sure I wanted to be a missionary, but I never deviated from wanting to enter the medical profession. We moved to Boston in 1959 and stayed until 1961, when Mother moved us back to Detroit because she was financially on her feet again. Oh, I wonder what kind of job she had. I know that she had been working the 2 jobs that didn't pay well. And I remember from the first chapter that she's really good with money. And so I wonder what she did to be able to save and have the money to move back to Detroit. Detroit was home for us, and besides, Mother had a goal in mind. Even though it wasn't possible in the beginning, she planned to go back and reclaim the house we lived in. Do you remember from the previous chapter that they had to rent out the house because they didn't have enough money to care for it and they had moved? So she wants to get that house back. And based on her character, the type of woman she is, I bet she's going to get that house back. The house, about the size of many garages today, was one of those early prefab post-World War II square boxes. The whole building probably wasn't 1,000 square feet, but it was in a nice area where the people kept their lawns clipped and showed pride in where they lived. Boys, she told us as the weeks and months passed, just wait. We're going back to our house on Deacon Street. We may not be able to afford living in it now, but we'll make it. In the meantime, we can still use the rent we get from it. Not a day passed that Mother didn't talk about going home. Determination burned in her eyes, and I never doubted that we would. Mother moved us into a multi-family dwelling just across the tracks from a section called Delray. It was a smoggy industrial area crisscrossed with train tracks, housing little sweatshops making auto parts. It was what I'd call an upper lower class neighborhood. The three of us lived on the top floor. My mother worked 2 and 3 jobs at a time. At one place, she cared for children, and at the next, she cleaned house. Whatever kind of domestic work anyone needed, Mother said, I can do it. If I don't know how right now, I learn fast. That's one thing that strikes me is she's humble. She's humble because she is willing to do domestic work in other people's homes, care for other people's children, whatever she needs to do to provide for her family. She's very humble. She doesn't say, "Oh, I'm too good to do that." She does what she needs to do. I admire that. Actually, there wasn't much else she could do to make a living because she had no other skills. Remember, she only had a third-grade education. She gained a lot of common sense education on these jobs because she was clever and alert. As she worked, she carefully observed everything around her. She was especially interested in the people because most of the time she worked for the wealthy. She'd come home and tell us, "This is what wealthy people do. This is how successful people behave. Here's how they think." She constantly drilled this kind of information into my brother and me. "Now you boys can do it too," she'd say with a smile, adding, "and you can do it better." Strangely enough, Mother started holding these goals in front of me when I wasn't a good student. No, that's not exactly true. I was the worst student in my whole 5th-grade class at Higgins Elementary School. My first 3 years in the Detroit public school system had given me a good foundation. When we moved to Boston, I entered the 4th grade, with Curtis 2 years ahead of me. We transferred to a small private church school because Mother thought that would give us a better education than the public schools. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. Though Curtis and I both made good grades, the work was not as demanding as it could have been, and when we transferred back to the Detroit public school system, I had quite a shock. Higgins Elementary School was predominantly white. Classes were tough, and the 5th graders that I joined could outdo me in every single subject. To my amazement, I didn't understand anything that was going on. I had no competition for the bottom of the class. To make it worse, I seriously believed I'd been doing satisfactory work back in Boston. Being at the bottom of the class hurt enough by itself, but the teasing and taunting from the other kids made me feel worse. As kids will do, there was the inevitable conjuncture about grades after we'd taken a test. Someone invariably said, "I know what Carson got." "Yeah, a big 0, another would shoot back. "Hey, dummy, think you'll get one right this time?" "Carson got one right last time. You know why? He was trying to put down the wrong answer." Sitting stiffly at my desk, I acted as if I didn't hear them. I wanted them to think I didn't care what they said. But I did care. Their words hurt, but I wouldn't allow myself to cry or run away. Sometimes a smile plastered my face when the teasing began. As the weeks passed, I accepted that I was at the bottom of the class because that's where I deserved to be. I'm just dumb. I had no doubts about that statement, and everyone else knew it too. Friends, this goes back to what I said about surrounding yourself with people who build you up. He was around his classmates and they tore him down, and what happened? It pulled him down. It made him start to think very, very poorly of himself, despite all Mom had done to build him up along the way. Although no one specifically said anything to me about my being black, I think my poor record reinforced my general impression that black kids just were not as smart as white ones. Oh, that's painful. That's painful because that is a stereotype that some people have of black kids. And because he went to this school and he wasn't performing well, he started to believe that himself as a black boy. He started to believe that. And my friends, let me be the one to tell you right here, right now, that is not true. Okay? That is not true. Your race does not make you more intelligent or less intelligent than somebody else. Um, it doesn't. You have to believe in yourself and believe that you can do whatever you put your mind to. And then you find your purpose, and then that's that. Okay? Let me finish up the chapter. Although no one specifically said anything to me about my being black. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that one. Looking back after all these years, I can almost still feel the pain. The worst experience of my school life happened in the 5th grade after a math quiz. As usual, Mrs. Williamson, our teacher, had us hand our papers to the person seated behind us for grading while she read the answers aloud. After grading, each test went back to its owner. Then the teacher called our names, and we reported our own grade aloud. Oh. As a teacher myself, that pains me terribly to think that kids are supposed to say their answers out loud. The test contained 30 problems. The girl who corrected my paper was the ringleader of the kids who teased me about being dumb. Miss Williamson started calling the names. I sat in the stuffy classroom, my gaze traveling from the bright bulletin board to the wall of windows covered with paper cutouts. The room smelled of chalk and children, and I ducked my head, dreading to hear my name. It was inevitable. Benjamin? Mrs. Williamson waited for me to report my score. I mumbled my reply. 9? Mrs. Williamson dropped her pen, smiled at me, and said with real enthusiasm, "Why, Benjamin, that's wonderful!" For me to score 9 out of 30 was incredible. Before I realized what was going on, the girl behind me yelled out, "Not 9!" She snickered. "He got none. He didn't get any of them right." Her snickers were echoed by laughs and giggles all over the room. "That's enough," the teacher said sharply, but it was too late. The girl's harshness cut out my heart. I don't think I ever felt so lonely or so stupid in my whole life. It was bad enough that I missed almost every question on just about every test, but when the whole class, at least it seemed like everyone there, laughed at my stupidity, I wanted to drop through the floor. Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to cry. I'd die before I let them know how they hurt me. Instead, I slapped a "I don't care" smile on my face and kept my eyes on my desk and the big round 0 on the top of my test. I could easily have decided that life was cruel, that being black meant everything was stacked against me, and I might have gone that way except for 2 things that happened during 5th grade to change my perception of the whole world. I wonder what's going to happen to change his perception, to make him no longer, because his perception right now is that he's dumb, and he's stupid. So there's a little foreshadowing there that something big is going to happen. Something's going to happen to change that perception, and I can't wait to find out. So we'll have to read that one tomorrow.